Okay, in this lab, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through an application that's very similar to the one that you're going to need to do. I'm going to try to remember to include these files, and it's an example of editing or updating a title in a book database. So I will put a folder in the resources section of Blackboard. So if you want to look at these files, you can. So I'm going to talk you through the non-MVC method to do this. If you want to use the MVC method, go right ahead. It's not required. A lot of people find that a lot more difficult to work with, and I'm really more interested in you getting down the basics of how to do an update in this. So you can go either way, just as long as the functionality of the search and the update work. So I'm going to talk you through this application that works with a database of books. There is a table named title. We'll look at that in a minute. And so you'll be able to search by title. You'll find all the records that match that title. It'll display them. You'll select the one that you want to update. That information will show up on a form. You'll click update and it will call the update code. So instead of using the 2 starter files that you're provided with in the lab, this does take a few more files. So what I have is I have the non-MVC index PHP, and all this is a form. There's no code on here at all. So the form has a place for them to input the title. Remember, you need to pay attention to the names that you choose on your forms. So the name of this input text field is going to be search term. And so when they click the submit button on this application, it's going to call the form, it's going to call the action, and the action in this case is going to be our search results.php. So what search results.php is going to do is it's going to grab whatever they filled in search term and pull out the required records from the database. So let's go look at non-MVC search results.php. You connect to the database, you include a header for our Sports Pro. You capture the search term that they sent over. Remember, it's named search term on the form. So that's what goes here in my filter input. Whatever they filled in that text box on the form comes into this filter input, passes that, and is stored in the variable that I've created named search title. So what we're going to do now is we're going to query the database, and we're going to find the records that match the title to whatever the user entered. In your lab, you're going to be pulling up by customer name. So you're going to do a fetch all just like I am here, assuming in my case that there are multiple titles that might be the same. But definitely when you're searching by last name, if somebody enters the last name Smith, you need to pull up all of the Smiths and let the user select which particular Smith they want to do the update on. So here's our query. We tell it that we want to select the title ID, the title, the edition, and the pub date. Now I put these values here just to show you the structure of this made-up database that I might be working with. You can do a select asterisk, which would select all of the fields in the database because you're going to use those for display purposes. But I just wanted to sneak in what the database fields are named here because of course we need to use that. So we're going to select these fields from the database. We're going to select it from the table titles. And we're going to have a where clause that says where the title field in the database meets up with our bound value that we are going to call search title. So this is a placeholder, and what we'll do in the next step after we prepare the query is we'll tell the program that this placeholder needs to be populated with our variable that we created earlier that is holding the search term that we're actually looking for. And that's done right here. It's pretty much the same as what you've done in previous labs. You're going to bind the value search title, and you're going to bind it to whatever is stored in the search title variable. So if they did a search for the name of this textbooks, then the query after that binding takes place would be search title, select title ID, title edition, and pub date from titles, where title equals Murox, PHP, and MySQL, or whatever the name of it is, because that's what we typed in and stored in this variable from the last form. So we're going to do a fetch all. Now this is important because we're going to use a fetch later on. Fetch all, remember, means you're going to select all of the records from your database that match that criteria. So in a fetch all, when you're not searching on the primary key, or I'm sorry, you'll use fetch all most of the time when you're not searching on the primary key because you don't know how many records you're going to return. However, if you're searching on the primary key, as we're going to do in just a little bit, generally speaking, what you'll do is you'll use a fetch because you can only return one record, because there should only be one record in your database identified by that primary key. So we close our database connection and we go into a form that displays our search results. Here's the title of the page, here's the heading of the page, and here comes our table. So we have title, edition, publication date at the top of our table, and then we start our loop. This is no different than any of the loops that we've had before. Our fetch all up here was an array. It stored multiple records in our variable named titles. So when we have a for each loop like we did before, we say for each titles, take one record at a time and deal with it as this variable name instead. So the for each loop comes in, it says for each item in the titles record set, the first one gets stored in title, it gets written, and then the loop iterates again. It takes the second record in the titles array or record set, and then it stores that new one in the variable title, overriding the last record, and then does what we do on the form, which we'll talk about in a minute, and it keeps doing that until it runs out of records. So if this search result only returned one record, then it would only go through it once. If it returned 10 titles that were the same, then it would go through this 10 times and then stop. So let's look at what we're doing. So with one record stored in title, the current record is stored in titled. We tell it to echo out. We would probably echo HTML special cars there, but I forgot to write that. So we would echo out. Actually, in this case, because we're not going to allow them to type, it's not, echo is actually appropriate there. Sorry. I digress. So we have the current record stored in title, and we tell it to print what was retrieved from the title field in the database. We tell it to look at the current record and print what was in the edition field of the database, and again the pub date from title. So this puts the 3 buttons on the page. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do another little button in the same row, kind of like we did with our delete button on the last lab. We're going to actually set up a new form inside this TD, this cell on the table. When they click the update, when they click the submit button or the value that says select, it's going to call our next bit of code. It's going to populate the form with the current data and allow them to update that. So what we need to do, just like we did on the delete thing, is we need to tell the next set of code which record to retrieve from the database based on which row it was in the table. So we put another hidden field here. Notice it's important that we named it title ID because we're going to be passing that on, and that's what we're going to use to retrieve the record that they've selected. And then we have a value of echoing out the title ID. This is the primary key that is associated with the current record that we just printed this information for. So the user won't see title ID, they'll just see title edition pub date. They'll say, oh yeah, that's the one that I want to update. They'll click our submit button that says select. It'll call the next form in our program and it'll send over the primary key of the selected record. Title ID here is the field name from the database. Title ID here is the name that I've given this hidden field on this form. And then the loop closes and we close our HTML. So the user picks the third one in the row. They click the select button in that row and it calls our non-MVC update title form. So let's take a look at that.